What's up, guys? Max here with another episode of the ScuttleButt Show, and I am honored and it's my privilege to be joined today by Ty Smith. Retired U.S. Navy SEAL and owner of Vigilance Risk Solutions out of San Diego. Ty, how are you doing today?
Pretty good, brother. How's it going?
It's going great. I'm really happy that we got to sit down today and do this. I have so many questions for you. We have a limited amount of time. Can we start with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So born and raised in East St. Louis, Illinois, right on the Illinois-Missouri border. Joined the Navy right after I graduated high school. Spent the first 4.5 years of my naval career as a military police officer in Sardinia, Italy. Had a blast over there. And then I went to BUD training to become a SEAL right after 9/11. I got to BUD about 4 or 5 months after 9/11 and spent the rest of my career in the SEAL teams. Had a fantastic career. The Navy saw fit to help me get an education at the end of my career. So I was able to complete a bachelor's in organizational management from Ashford University. And then I completed a Master of Business for Veterans degree at USC Marshall Business School as I was retiring from the SEAL teams. And as I was retiring, I launched Vigilance Risk Solutions. We are now a technology-enabled company that specializes in conflict and violence prevention. So that means we help our clients to identify and mitigate all of their known and unknown threats of conflict and violence within their company and outside of their company, protecting them from the most damaging consequences of workplace violence, which are litigation, physical and psychological harm to employees, and then damage to the company's brand and reputation. And we run the company out of La Jolla, California. So I retired from the SEAL teams here and built the company here. And very, very fortunate in that I have an amazing family. I'm married. I have 3 beautiful children. One we had 1 year ago. So I'm not sleeping much these days while I'm trying to navigate thriving through this pandemic and all the craziness that's happening in the country right now. But overall, I'm super grateful and I'm having fun.
That's well, I'm glad to hear that you're having fun. That's probably a big part of keeping going at that kind of pace. Every single one of those things is a major accomplishment. And it's very impressive what you've done in the Navy, obviously, but then after the Navy as well, starting a company where you have employees. I was looking at your executive leadership and board of directors on your website, and I was reading some of the articles. Even during COVID, there was an article about an uptick in firearm sales and hate crimes, worries about domestic terrorism and workplace violence, suicide, firearms-related violence events, and what you're doing to try. And obviously, in the past several years, those types of events have had an uptick, whether it is domestic terrorism or workplace shootings or school shootings or gun violence seems to be on an uptick, and you're doing stuff to try to mitigate that, which is amazing. It's funny because last night, jokingly, I said it's kind of funny, like actual terrorist attacks aren't even news anymore. In the last few years, things have seemed so bad. If I woke up in the morning and my wife was like, "Oh my God, did you hear?" And I'm like, "What?" There was a terrorist attack in New York. I'd be like, "Oh, okay, at least it wasn't anything, real serious." Like, it seems like things have gotten so crazy. People are really taking it out on one another. But a question I have is it actually worse now, or is it something we're becoming more aware of?
As far as the emerging threat trends that we're seeing as a result of the pandemic, or just everything that's happening in the country as a whole right now?
Well, so we'll talk about like what's going on in the whole country, but for starters, like workplace violence, school safety, is that actually getting worse, or is that an awareness thing or an emerging increasing problem?
No, it's absolutely getting worse. So at least over the last 10 years, conflict and violence in the workplace has been on a steady increase. Now, as a result of And actually, let me go back to a little bit. Over the last 3 to 5 years alone, the active shooter threat by itself has increased by more than 240%. So the problem as a whole is increasing. But what's scary is that as a result of the pandemic, and now compounded with all of the civil unrest that we see across the country right now, we believe that conflict and violence in the workplace is about to skyrocket over the next 6 months to a year. Because what we know about the type of mental stress that is created from prolonged threats to our livelihood, say in the wake of a major natural disaster, like say Hurricane Katrina, we know that the type of stress that creates on the everyday individual and families when people are, their livelihoods are threatened and loved ones are lost, your ability to just live a normal life every day is affected for a prolonged period of time. Human beings, especially if they aren't well educated or well trained, they don't respond well to that. And so when you take a look at how long this pandemic has been wreaking havoc across the country, how long we've been on lockdown, how long people that are suffering in situations of domestic violence or violence against children have been sustained in that environment because of the quarantine. When organizations go to reopen the workplace, it's not going to be as easy as they think. There's going to be a lot of mental trauma that individuals are going to be bringing back to work with them. And we have to consider that because we believe that it's absolutely going to cause an increase in conflict and violence in the workplace. And so I personally think by Q3, Q4, organizations like ours are going to be very, very busy because organizations, and rightfully so, are concerned right now with things like, are we going to be able to continue to operate, or are we going to have to close the business? How do we reopen the workplace? How is this going to affect our model? Have we had to completely pivot in order to survive the pandemic? What do our new marketing plans look like? They're going to be worried about those types of things that are generating revenue, and rightfully so. I worry about that with my business. But something that I worry about is that the mental health aspect of this pandemic and the civil unrest that's wreaking havoc on the country right now, it could be the most underappreciated aspect of this entire problem, the pandemic and the civil unrest, and what happens when we reopen the workplace and we bring all of this tension back into the workplace. Employees are still concerned about, hey, I know I'm working today, but will I be working 6 months from now? Is my leadership talking to me about, hey, how are we doing money-wise? Are we going to run out of business, or are we healthy? Are we looking to continue layoffs? Am I going to be furloughed again? Employees are going to be worried. By the way, what's going to happen when the first person sneezes in the workplace? How are human beings going to respond to that when they're already completely stressed out and not even sure if they should shake one another's hands again? And then we compound that with the fact that we're reopening the workplace in the middle of probably the most racial tension we've seen in this country in decades. How is that going to affect the relationships between our interracial employees in the workplace? So yeah, the problem has been increasing, and I think it's going to continue to increase at a much more rapid pace over the next year or so.
That's scary to think about, but it makes sense when you start aligning the Swiss cheese model there, right? So like, classic Navy Swiss cheese model of, if you've got a bunch of layers of Swiss cheese, which are your problems, and they're shifting all the time, things might fall through a layer here and there and then stop. But if those holes align, this is going to fall all the way through, and there's no bottom at that point. It's on a downward trend. And yeah, things are really crazy around the country right now. There's things that I've never seen happen before, like protests that have ended in occupations of cities, and I think I want to ask you if you want to talk about it, because I saw some stuff on your you posted a video on Facebook which was very powerful so I guess like the elephant in the room is there's not a lot of black Navy SEALs. So can you speak on your experience in the military? Because I think like for veterans, there's an idea that in the military there's no racism or prejudice or anything like that. But I don't think that that's true. You see it a lot. You see it a lot. You hear about it a lot, and it's really unfortunate. And I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen it in the workplace. Somebody just asked me the other day if I've ever like written anything down on a command climate survey, and one time I wrote like I've heard some pretty fucked up shit in the smoke pit, some real racist stuff, and I don't know. Do you want to? Can you talk about the military aspect at all?
Sure. So I'll preface this by saying that I had an amazing naval career, and my time in naval special warfare was fantastic, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, I'm extremely proud of the service that I've given to this country. But make no mistakes, the SEAL teams is, they are no different from any other organization in the military in that, yeah, we have bad apples too, just like every other organization. Are there racist guys in the SEAL teams? Yeah, of course. Are there racist police officers? Yeah. Are there racist whites and blacks? Yeah, of course. The SEAL teams is no different. And I believe that that's a part of the reason why this is the juggernaut of all problems, right? It's never going to stop, because in any group or organization of people, you're always going to have a certain percentage of those people that are rotten, period. And you're always going to have good men and women that are trying to compensate for that group, or that are trying to combat that group in an effort to create a better society for all of us. But all organizations or groups of people are going to have them, and the SEAL teams is no different. I was extremely fortunate in that, although I knew, there had been instances of racism in the SEAL teams throughout my career, I was fortunate in that I never had to face any. I was really, really lucky. I can honestly say that I never had any situation in the SEAL teams where I felt as though I was being discriminated against because of the color of my skin. But I know that I was protected. So I was very fortunate in that throughout my time in the SEAL teams, I had great leadership all the time. And I know that I was protected because I had great leadership. Because I of course, I knew who the guys were that were racist. I knew who the guys were at the team or at TradeEd or wherever that were racist. But those guys never gave me any issues, or at least anytime I even had a conversation, even an uncomfortable conversation with those guys, I never felt as though, they were speaking to me from a place of malice because, they were racist. So I was lucky, man. I was protected. But I do know other individuals of color in the teams while, on active duty at the same time as myself that had serious problems, really, really serious problems. And, those individuals consulted me for guidance on those particular issues. And unfortunately, in a couple of those different situations, those individuals tried to do what they thought was the right thing by going to their leadership and actually taking the route of making a formal complaint. And what is sad about their situation is that in those cases, the right thing wasn't done by their leadership. And instead of those guys being able to go on and have great careers, yeah, they went on and had decent careers, I guess if that's what you want to call it, but they were penalized for doing what they thought was the right thing, and which on paper was the right thing to do. So it's, it's there just like it is in any other organization. But me personally, I think I was protected and I had a great career and I didn't have to face it.
Well, it's one thing that really like drives me up a wall with this issue is there's so many people I've talked to who deny, right? There's deniers who think that there's not a problem, or that the problem is so acute that it doesn't warrant a response. And what I say is, like, who do you need to hear it from? Like, whose mouth does it have to come from for you to take it seriously? You know, like, why does every person of color across many races, you know, Asian, Hispanic, Black, whatever it is, have a story of being, you know, experiencing prejudice or bias or profiling? You know, like, why is there any issue with us accepting it as a reality in the first place? And, you know, maybe just accepting the problem is the first step for a lot of people to have a serious conversation about what a solution might be. You touched on in your video about education. Can you speak on education a little bit and what you mean, like what we could do, what people should do to better educate themselves?
I would love to talk about that. So it is my belief, based off what I have learned, especially over the last 10, 15 years, that the key to individual growth is education. And there's two parts to that. There's academic education, of course, like you need to get up and go to school and get a higher education and earn a bachelor's degree and earn a master's degree and maybe even do a PhD. The point is, never stop feeding your brain, never stop learning, be a lifelong learner, because if you're not learning, you're not growing. And if you're not growing, then what the hell are you doing here? But the other side of that, which is, in my opinion, just as, if not more important, is emotional intelligence. Educate yourself so that you can be an emotionally intelligent person, so that you can actually have the ability to think openly and to be tolerant. You know, because you and I both know a lot of academically accomplished idiots. There is not a shortage of those human beings on a planet, right? Just because you have a PhD or a master's degree, that doesn't make you an intelligent person. You might be smart, it doesn't make you intelligent. So I think that I've learned that it's extremely important that you have to have both. You absolutely must have both, because having spent a significant portion of my adult life outside of the United States, in different countries, interacting and being enveloped in different cultures, learning different languages, meeting these different people, and really experiencing life in ways that I had never dreamed. I've learned that, like, every one of us is connected, man. We're all in this together. We spend so much time immediately looking to identify the differences in ourselves instead of, by default, trying to find what we have in common so that we can be on the same page. But we're all connected. And I've learned that we all have the same struggles. We all worry about the same things. And by the way, when we bleed, we all bleed red. Every one of us, regardless of what we look like on the outside. And you and I know that way more than most. And so I've learned that it's pointless for people to dislike or look down on one another simply because of what you see on the outside. Because the fact of the matter is, you have no idea what is in a person's heart. You have no idea what is in another person's heart. But you should be trying with everything in your power to understand what's in another human being's heart, especially if you're going to engage them or if you're going to talk shit about that person. And it takes emotional intelligence to do that. It takes the ability to listen because you truly want to understand in order to do that. It takes empathy. And so just because you are an academically, smart person, it doesn't mean that you are an emotionally intelligent person. And I think that it takes an academically proven person and an emotionally intelligent person to actually help us to solve this problem of systematic and organized racism in the United States. And every person in this country, we owe it to one another to try to be that person. And the reason why I said that this is kind of like the juggernaut of all problems, once it got started, it's impossible to stop it. It's because when we consider a part of the problem in minority communities across the country, I was going to say across the world even, but let's just talk about the United States. For centuries, it's been programmed into these communities that education isn't important. So how do we reverse centuries of programming? It is not a coincidence that I lived 18 years in East St. Louis, Illinois, before I left to join the military. And over that 18-year period of time, not one time did anyone ever ask me if I wanted to go to college. No teachers, no counselors. It wasn't a conversation that we had within my family. That is not a coincidence. And so when you have a group of people that are relatively unsophisticated because they've been turned away from education, you can tell that group of people pretty much anything you want and they'll believe it because they don't know any better. And when it was taught to our communities to not value education, make no mistake, it was a brilliant plan because the people that planned this knew that would be the result of it. So I think that how we have to go about solving this problem is by, like you said, we have to have the very difficult conversation. We have to acknowledge that there is a problem and the fact that we've completely isolated a certain demographic of people and relegated them to not growing with the rest of the world academically. We have to solve that because we're not going to be able to have an intelligent and a super uncomfortable conversation about what the problem really is and how we go about solving it until we can all get on the same page. And right now, what you're seeing in the streets, you're seeing a bunch of people that are saying we are not on the same page as you right now. And we're going to burn this bitch to the ground to prove a point because we are not on the same page with you right now. We're tired of this. So yeah, man, I think that education is the key. And we have to start there. We have to start by teaching minority communities that education is the key. And that just because you want to go to college doesn't make you an Oreo or a cracker or a coon or a sellout. Because you want to learn how to speak proper English or because you want to learn how to understand advanced math. That doesn't make you a sellout. We need to start teaching people that, raising Black billionaires is absolutely the solution. And they have to start by paying attention in school. It has to become commonplace that African-American kids go from high school to college. That's kind of unheard of in the kind of community where I grew up. In most of the communities that I've heard about that are Caucasian communities, it's normal for kids to go, I'm going from high school to college. That's not normal in places like Watts, LA, Compton, East St. Louis, Illinois. That's not commonplace. And you hit the nail on the head. Most of the people in this country will not acknowledge that, but that is a fact and it's a problem. And we have to fix it. And it starts with education. Without education, how can we build resources?
I think that is a great place to start. But it's such a complicated problem because it goes back to school funding and then generations of abusing communities and reversing or like training communities the way that what you were just talking about to not value education and breaking that cycle is it seems like a critical point, like a critical point to hit that would change the course, you know? But how do you break through all the BS and all the systems already in place? I guess that's where it takes strong leadership. Now, I have based on what you said, I have a question, which is, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, you are a role model. Like, you are someone that people should look up to, not just your you know, where you came from or where you got to, but then how you continue to strive for new levels of greatness and starting a company and just educating yourself and being a stand-up person by all accounts, and then being willing to speak out against problems that you see, being willing to have a public voice on these things. You're someone that people should look to as a role model. Did you have any role models growing up?
Well, I don't consider myself to be a role model. I try to do the right thing as much as I possibly can. I try to do the right thing by myself. I try to do the right thing by the people within my tribe, and the result is the result. But in my opinion, I am simply a product of what my family created. You know, my role models were the people in my family. My uncle Kelvin, we call him Poochie, who's former Army. I think seeing him serve was really where I kind of got, you know, the itching to even think about the military. And I spent a lot of time with him growing up and just really understanding his perspective of what a man was supposed to be to his family. But also, you know, my uncle Jimmy, who served in the Air Force, I looked up to him a lot, and he was just always, I mean, he reminded me of my grandpa. He was a spitting image of my mom's dad, and he was just like a man's man, you know? And so I looked up to him, and I learned a lot about how to carry myself, especially going into my teenage years, because I was an awkward kid, man, especially in high school. I wasn't popular. I wasn't funny. I wasn't good looking. I wasn't any of that stuff. So I learned a lot from him too. But I think the people that I looked up to the most in my family were the women in my family, believe it or not, because I was raised primarily by women. So my mom is a retired 27-year police officer in East St. Louis. And for the most part, you know, she was a single mom. She was married to my stepdad for almost 10 years, but I was young when they split, and he and I still have a great relationship. Although we did it when we were younger, you know, we learn some stuff as dudes, and we get older and we start to understand a bunch of stuff in retrospect. So he and I have a great relationship now. And he's someone that actually, when I just need to get grounded and hear the truth, you know, he's someone that I still call to this day when I need to have those kind of conversations. But my mom and my aunts are, you know, they're everything to me. And of course I felt that way about my grandmothers as well. And that's where they learned everything they learned, but they are the definition of, you know, in my opinion, of struggle and accomplishment. You know, every obstacle you can think of has been put in front of those women, and they have just dominated, and they've raised incredible families while facing more adversity than you and I can imagine. Because I always say, not only do they have it against them that they're Black, but they're also women, you know, so they got a double whammy against them. And I can never recall a time where I went to one of my aunts in one of my deepest moments of despair, and I wasn't given the best advice that I could have been given. I can't think of one time where I didn't draw strength from seeing my mom struggle raising 5 of us pretty much by herself, on an East St. Louis cop salary. So yeah, I mean, I would have to say that that's where I got the foundation for being who I am. Those are my role models. And if I'm a role model today, it's simply because I am a product of what they created.
I think, by all accounts, you're someone that people would I'm sure do and should look up to, based on what you've accomplished as an American, as a war fighter, as a man, as a father. Yeah, it's all a good place to look. And I feel like, maybe I don't know, but I feel like there's a lacking in large scale public figures like a black president, like Obama, and but if you say like it's all good because we had a black president, like what more do you want? That's BS, there's definitely like a missing piece as far as like large scale black role models or minority role models compared to like people like white people in the same situations. You see it in movies, on TV, in sports, in politics, and you kind of talked about black billionaires. What's the power in having private money? What would be the power in that?
Well, think of how powerless you are when you have no money. And that's most of our minority communities, brother.
I totally get that. I totally get that.
Mm-hmm. We don't have plentiful leadership in any of these positions because I'll say it again, for centuries, an entire demographic of people were set aside and looked at as though, hey, you know what? The rest of the world is going to continue to turn and we're going to continue to evolve and advance by way of education and technology. And we're going to build resources and we're going to build wealth. But this demographic of people, they will not be allowed to participate. How do we reverse centuries of that? Like, no wonder we don't have a bunch of African-American leadership in all of these different positions when, again, for centuries, we were tricked into not loving education. I'm at a place in my life now where all I want to do is learn. And listen, I know that some of that comes with age and maturity, but I live in Coronado, California now, and I'm very fortunate to live here, but I overhear conversations of kids walking down the street all the time, and I love hearing these conversations because I hear teenage kids talking to one another about how hard they're studying for an exam and which college that they apply to, and how they're disappointed because their GPA wasn't as high as they thought it would be. Man, I can't tell you one time I overheard a conversation like that growing up in the hood where I grew up. I can't tell you one time where I've gone back there present day and overheard one of those conversations. So for years, for hundreds of years, we weren't advancing academically as a whole, as a people, as much as everyone else, if you want to look at things from the macro level. So no wonder we've only had one black president. No wonder, we don't have as many black billionaires in the United States as there are white billionaires in the United States. That isn't rocket science. That's why, again, I say it. To even think about fixing this problem, we have to start with education. We have to educate the people. We absolutely do. And it's my very pessimistic outlook that This was the juggernaut of all problems. It will never be stopped. At least not in our lifetime, man. Slavery was 400 years ago, and it was a long time ago, but we're still seeing the effects of it now, and it's been 400 years, and we still haven't figured out how to solve it. So maybe we need another 400 years. Maybe, like I said, it won't happen in our lifetime. That's just my outlook on it.
I actually do think that it's a very current problem. Like, your parents are probably the age where they experience segregated systems. Like many other people, like either parents, like
so check this out. I'm going to stop you right there based off what you just said, and I promise not to take us too far down this rabbit hole. So my parents are actually young. You know, my parents had me when they were 18 years old. That is something that is extremely common in minority communities, isn't it, brother? It's not as common in communities that are highly educated, though, is it?
Well, so let me just let me try to think.
You know what I mean? So I no, please continue with what you were about to say about segregation. But I got to be honest with you and say that no, my parents were actually a little bit too young to have had to deal with that. My grandparents, of course, but my parents, no.
Well, let me think about I did some quick math in my head, which I know is very scary. Mm-hmm. So here's how I figured it out. What I based that comment off of is, I assume you're at least 38 because you retired from the Navy, right? So I assume 38, right? I know you've been 42. Retired for a few years, so you're 42. So if your parents had you when they were 18, that would have made that they were born 60 years ago, which would have been 1960. Which there was still segregation throughout the 60s.
I was born in 78.
So they were born in 60.
Yeah.
So there was still segregated systems in the 60s, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there were, especially down in the South, but in Illinois, I'm not sure.
Okay. So
I've never heard my parents, or at least I've never heard my mom. I didn't really grow up with my biological dad, another problem that we're not going to get into, but I never heard my mom talk about having to endure any kind of segregation while she was growing up. Now, I do remember hearing my grandmother talk about it.
Yeah. So probably nobody alive is greater than 3 generations separated from real segregation and government-sponsored racist programs.
Right, of course.
So this is definitely a modern problem, because people who are living,
absolutely,
people who are still living really healthy, fulfilling lives were raised in a time when they were actively not being suppressed by the government of this country. Mm-hmm. And that is insane to me, that people will then go, get over slavery, it was hundreds of years ago. You know what I mean? Or, get over it, everyone's equal now. Like, that is the wrong attitude. I am so against, if somebody says something like that, I'll always say something, because it's so ignorant. It's so ignorant to say. This is in recent history. This is modern. And then the face of it's just changed, where now it's covert. It's covert programs. Mm-hmm. And when you said a minute ago that, and I asked, what's the power in having private money? And you said, well, think of how powerless you are without it. Mind blown. Like, that really makes sense. And I've had a couple moments like that recently, engaging in conversations like this, where I've had a perspective shift. And I feel like that was one of those things where where it's hard, where I've areas where I've struggled to empathize because I don't have the lived experience. And then I have kind of like I hear, sometimes you just hear one thing, somebody says one thing, and it changes your perspective. And that was kind of one of those things. So I want to thank you for saying that.
Yeah, you got it, man.
So education, I do feel like education is key. Anywhere in the world where they didn't value education has not done well. Especially history, right? Learning from history. Yep. Because the idea is that humans have a short memory, like as far as generation to generation. That's why problems repeat. You know, that's why we kind of go cyclically through a lot of the same problems over and over again. And right now, people are talking about, you know, erasing statues and changing army base names that were after Confederate soldiers and Confederate flags, and I'm on board basically with that. Like, I think that I get that why we should do that. But should those kinds of things be replaced with other historical monuments celebrating heroes of that era? Because it's important that we don't forget the struggles that people went through, right? So how can we, what do you think is a way to better educate on historically these problems? Because people, like I said, are still denying, right? So how do we educate on because, you know, recently I've seen all these infographic videos where, like, you know, a white family in a house pops up and all this, and a black family and they're segregated and redlined, and it's like off of YouTube or something like that. But it's I don't feel like it's reaching the right people. How can people educate themselves on history and get a good idea of the build up to where we are today?
Well, I think that because, at least when I was growing up in elementary school and, you know, studying social studies and studying history in high school, knowing what I know now, you know, we weren't taught the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
So we would have to start by looking at, what are we actually teaching our kids? This is what I think I've learned regarding this particular subject. You know, you're right. We have a major problem with acknowledgement, and it's because human beings don't want to talk about things that are really, really hurtful to them. People don't want to talk about mistakes that they made. You know, I said to somebody a while ago, you know, I've got a bunch of friends that actually grew up in Germany, and you probably spent a bunch of time in Germany too, being an NSW, and you want to see a German citizen become visibly uncomfortable, start a conversation with them regarding World War II and Adolf Hitler. You know, they don't want to talk about that because that is not them, and they don't approve of that. And every time it's brought up, it's kind of like a stain on your soul. And in the United States, for us, that stain is slavery. And so people don't want to acknowledge that happened, and that it's still a problem to this day. Hundreds of years later, we're still suffering from that. So yeah, again, it starts with education, but also, you know, we got to teach our kids the right stuff. We have to teach people what actually happened. You know, do I agree with the removal of those monuments? You know, I'll be completely honest with you. I don't know. I understand why people would want to keep them, and I understand, of course, why people would want them gone. But the reason why I say I don't know if I agree with it, because, I mean, come on, man, like, this isn't a problem that we're going to solve on the surface. Like, give me a break. In my opinion, like, no, that's distracting me from us talking about the actual problem. Those damn statues over there are not the actual problem. You know, the problem is that we've got racist police officers that are publicly murdering African-American people in broad daylight, and they're getting away with it. That's the problem. I don't give a shit about those statues over there. Talk to me about that. You know, so I understand both sides of it, but to me, it's irrelevant right now. You know what I mean? We have to start teaching what actually happened in this country, and what is the result of what actually happened in this country. You know what I mean? If we're gonna talk about removing statues, okay, well then how about we get rid of Columbus Day as a federal holiday? You know? Well, why are we still teaching kids that Columbus discovered America when we already know that Native Americans, he didn't discover anything. People were living here. So yeah, it all goes back to education to me.
So we got about 8 minutes left, and I want to get you out of here on time. So if it was me, if I was in a leadership role and somebody said that they wanted a statue taken down or a base renamed because of the historical context, I think I'm at a point where within reason, I would do anything to support, right? If a group of people, if a large group of people, which they have to, if a large group of people saying something, it has to come from some place of reality, something real, says that this is a problem. And just because I don't understand it, I think I would do virtually anything to make moves in the right direction within reason to show support. And then, but I think history is important. So I would say we need to replace this with a statue of somebody who was fought for civil rights, and have people, icons that you can look to and be inspired by. Instead of denying history, acknowledging history, but acknowledging heroes, acknowledging good people who fought against evil. But you talked about I remember in your video you said you're not sure where you stand with Democrats and Republicans and the people in charge, and who to trust and what people's intentions are. Can you talk about that a little bit? Kind of because I think a lot of people distrust politics right now on both sides, because it seems like for one account, people will basically say anything. I don't know, and then move on to the next thing. And I don't know what to take seriously or what to believe anymore, or who's got what intentions, or if it's just about election and power. Can you just talk about that a little bit on what you were getting at?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you just said it, man. You just summed it up in the last couple of seconds of what you said. You can turn on the TV one day, hear a politician saying one thing. You can turn on the TV the next week and hear the same politician saying the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And then denying on television that they even said what you heard them say the week before. And so what is really bothersome about that to me is that there are still people supporting those politicians. You know what I mean? And so it blows my mind regarding the motives of those people. And I just feel like I've lost trust, in parties as a whole. Here's one thing, I've never agreed with us having the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. People have asked me for years, hey man, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? And for years, I've always answered that same. I am an American. I am neither of those. Because I think that that's a part of the problem. Again, we're immediately looking for how are we different? Oh, you're a Republican, I'm Democrat. People talk about the gun debate and arming school teachers, and you got the Democratic point of view and the Republican point of view. How about you and I just put on our dad hats and think about this from the standpoint of being fathers instead of, well, what do the Republicans think or the Democrats think? So starting the conversation with our differences immediately, you're agreeing to never agree. You're never going to solve the problem. And I feel like we're lacking in authentic and forward-leaning leadership and honest leadership that is going to tell us the truth all the time, even if their voice is shaken while they're doing it, even if they know that the result is going to be a public execution, they are going to tell us the truth, whether we want to hear it or not. And I just feel like we're not getting that these days. So yeah, man, I'm not really trustful of our leadership right now.
It's really hard to be, because if there's one thing politicians are great at, it's not answering the question at all. A lot of times it's, whether it's a lie or the truth, a lot of times you don't get the answer to the question at all. They're great at it. And I've, in my personal life, I've always lived by the motto, I'd rather someone not like me for the truth than like me for a lie.
Yep.
I believe in, the most important thing to me is that I can feel like I lived an honorable life. And anytime there's something that calls that into question, I want to correct that. And I want to avoid it being a thing at all. But if something comes up and it's a problem and it's making me feel like if I'm living honorably, I want to resolve it. I want to, get to a point where I feel better and And there's very low levels of honor in politics, I feel like, a lot of times, as far as honesty goes, because people will be outright dishonest to be liked and electable. But I do also think it's on us, though, as the public, as the civilian population of the United States, to challenge our leaders, but accept their flaws. So right now we live in a time where one mistake and your life is over, your career is over in the public eye, and there's no wiggle room. And I think that we need to celebrate people in spite of their flaws instead of destroying them for their flaws. And I'm not saying everything's forgivable and everything's fine, but people are people.
Of course.
And if you're looking for a perfect leader and one mistake and they can't be it, we're just never going to find that person.
Yeah, that's completely unrealistic and illogical, because we are all flawed, every one of us. But just because we're flawed doesn't mean that you don't have a heart of solid gold. We all make mistakes, and we have to learn to look past all of the mistakes that we as a country have made, even the mistakes that we have made with malice against one another. And we have to realize that we're in this stuff together, man. We are all connected. We are all the same. You and I have seen it in combat. We are all the same, and we're all connected. It's time for us to put all this bullshit aside and move on.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's probably a perfect place to wrap up for now, because right on the dot here, and we'll get you going on to your next meeting, because you're hustling all the time and you're working hard, a lot harder than me, I'll say that. So, hey, Ty.
I don't know about that.
I appreciate you so much, man, coming on here. It means a lot to me. Hopefully we can do this again sometime soon and pick up this conversation again.
Let me know anytime, brother.
All right. Awesome. I will talk to you soon. Have a great day. And until next time.